Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars The Clone Wars episode review. This one's going to be for Season 7, Episode 7, which is called Dangerous Debt. Now, we're in the third episode of this arc, the sort of middle arc of Season 7, this Ahsoka and the Martez sister arc. And I think it's fair to say that so far, 3 episodes in, there's just been sort of glimpses of what we've wanted from this arc. It really hasn't delivered on the level that I think people wanted it to. And you add that to the fact that we started off with not really the greatest arc in the Bad Batch arc. And so you end up with a situation where we really haven't had the sort of excitement level that we really wanted from this season just yet. Yes, episode 5 was great in that just Ahsoka's return to the Clone Wars. Fantastic, but since she has returned, this really hasn't delivered for what this arc I think needs to do. In that I think this is a perfectly fine arc if we had a full season. Any other season you insert this arc in, it's perfectly fine and great. The problem is it has to serve the role as being the only Ahsoka away from the Jedi Order arc. And on that count, it's really not delivering. That's the real problem here. 3 episodes in, we have 3-4 minor references to, I suppose, the arc with Ahsoka of her thinking about the Jedi Order, her place in it and outside of it. This whole arc really has been about the Martez sisters, and Ahsoka's just sort of been there and she's been thinking about a little bit of things. It hasn't been as sort of directed, as focused as I think it needs to be. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of Star Wars fans get very frustrated with where they're going. Now, thankfully this was the episode that seemingly introduced the sort of finale element to the series in that, oh, it's Bo-Katan, it's some of the Mandalorians. Great, this is how Ahsoka's going to get back into contact with people. Now, obviously, it doesn't really explain how she gets from here to being in contact with Anakin and Obi-Wan and leading this siege and all this sort of stuff. But it is at least something. It is a setup that the last episode of this arc is really going to have to deliver. It will probably resolve the Martez sisters arc and also set up the finale arc for Ahsoka. So, I have confidence that next week's episode is going to be very good. It's just that I think, once again, this episode was pretty similar to the first 2 in this arc. I think it was probably still the best, just because we had more action. But it also has that problem of just the way it was structured, of just we start with them in prison, we end with them in prison. And so the entire arc was just a sort of failed escape attempt, where they were just out in the open, more or less only to get spotted by Bo-Katan. Yes, it was sort of meaningful in that they nearly got out here, they nearly got out there, and some of the action along the way was very fun. But, a lot of it, I think, could have just been resolved with them just talking in prison and just having one escape attempt, or having the failed escape attempt just be a section of the episode rather than, the entire episode. Because, look, we got to see Ahsoka is obviously the most skilled of the group. She's basically the most skilled fighter in play at the moment, in that she was able to take out Pike sort of at ease. And, if she had had her lightsabers, you got the sense that everything would have been completely resolved exactly the way that was needed. But as it was, she had to basically hide her powers for the most part, and she didn't really get her hands on any, decent weaponry, so there was only so much that she could do. The big part of this episode for me was getting the Martez sisters' backstory of why they hate the Jedi. I still don't think it was fantastic, because it's more of this sort of sort of simplistic writing, I think. Because what we're told here is that, okay, what happened to the parents was that during Zero's escape attempt back in what was it, season 1/2, end of season 1, and then I think they cover it in season 2 at some point, or is it season 3? Again, it gets a little bit awkward with the timeline of episodes, but it's related to the whole Cad Bane helping Zero escape plot. And they basically get across the idea that as part of that escape, Luminara was involved in it, and she, a ship that she landed on was hit. It also sort of fell down the sort of central point of Coruscant, so it was falling down the floors, and she had a choice to make between, does she crash it into the landing platform, potentially kill all the people there, or does she smash it into the wall and risk the people who kind of live there? She decided to crash it into the wall, and it resulted in the destruction of the Martez sisters' house and the death of their parents. And the reason that they really hate the Jedi is because, yes, that happened, but also because Luminara then came into them and basically just said, I made a choice, the Force will be with you, and left it like that. And that's why they don't like the Jedi anymore. And it's like, okay, for them as characters, you get it. Not the most, sympathetic approach there, but at the same time, was any words from a Jedi going to help them through what was going on there? The Jedi can't really take them in. It's after it's happened, like, yes, an apology would have been great, but it's Luminara. It's like that's the big thing in all of this. The fact that they really put this on Luminara. Again, they didn't say Luminara's name, but the fact that, like, they said green-skinned, female Jedi, active at that time, it's the only real character who sort of makes sense to fit this, and especially with the approach to having that reaction. She's one of the only Jedi who would actually say it like that, and everyone has criticized Luminara for being like that. That was the whole Anakin Luminara dynamic in the factories on Geonosis when Barriss and Ahsoka were presumed dead. She was just completely willing to let them go, and we were meant to sort of believe that, like, Anakin was at fault when she was just like, yep, they're gone. So yeah, like, that's the thing here. They refuse to sort of commit to actually really, I suppose, presenting like a negative about the Jedi, and instead just went for the really sort of easy path with it. And that, like, Ahsoka's been in these situations before, so she has to understand the position that Luminara was in at the time. And while the response afterwards wasn't great, what was any Jedi meant to do to resolve this? Like, it's not the responsibility of the Jedi to then sort of, like, change the way the system is and, like, make sure they're put in some sort of an orphanage or taken care of in the sense of, like, that's the responsibility of the government of Coruscant, not necessarily the Jedi. And it just feels like a little bit of, like, one of these situations where, once again, like, people putting a little bit too much stock in the Jedi and expecting, like, everything of them, and then when they don't meet that super high expectation, they're considered to be a negative. In that, like, if this is meant to be the big thing that has Ahsoka further doubt the Jedi Order, then it doesn't really hit home as much, because the specifics of what they say are vague enough to where you can be very understanding of what happened. Yes, you can still be sympathetic to the Martez sisters, but at the same time, like, it was an incident, the Jedi were in pursuit. We've seen that a lot of times. There's blaster fire all over the place, ships getting shot down, collateral damage. It happens with any situation where you have a sort of hero character having to go in amongst the sort of civilians, and there's like a villain who's not taking care of any of that. And yeah, when it is a decision of, like, effectively, do you kill potentially, like, a few people in a house or, like, everyone on a landing platform, like, what decision is meant to be made when it's, like, that close? And I think that's the thing of, like, it's a nice story. It's nice to finally sort of understand that, but it's also a case of, like, if they had any more context, if the sisters, I think, had any more context to the Jedi, they probably wouldn't feel the way that they do. So that's just where I felt like it wasn't really anything particularly thought-provoking. Like, it hit Ahsoka in the sense of, like, she was emotional about it, but I don't know how much it changed or really had her thinking about her perspective on the Jedi Order, just because of how specific the situation was. As for the rest of the episode, it was basically just, Ahsoka, Rafa, and Trace just avoiding and then killing a bunch of Pikes, like knocking them out, shooting them. I think one got chopped in half by an elevator. It was it was fine and it made sense in that, like, okay, you know, the sisters aren't as skilled as Ahsoka, so they sort of get left behind. Ahsoka has to sort of go off on her own, come back for them with some sort of clever tactic. She's constantly having to use the Force really subtly so she doesn't reveal herself. And the one time that she's nearly found out is when she does the sort of Force-assisted leap. But she quickly sort of, you know, distracts them, and the topic of conversation has changed. But they're at least a little bit suspicious of her. I think beyond that, the only other important scene I felt there was in terms of dialogue was between Ahsoka and Rafa, where again Ahsoka brought up the idea of, you know, like you think you're basically doing the right thing for your family just because Trace would never kind of disagree with you, but do you not think it's a problem the fact that she wouldn't ever go against you or disagree with you? If you say something, she'll believe it because you're sisters and she does trust you. That, you know, given that you have that kind of relationship with her, you should be more responsible with your decisions, given that she is going to just go ahead with you regardless of what it is. I like Ahsoka being able to see that that is very clearly what the dynamic is. That Trace, as much as she sort of started this whole breakout escape, you can tell from her personality she's not suited to just doing this over and over and over again. This is fine to escape, but her life constantly having to like be a criminal, smuggle stuff around, deal with these organizations, it doesn't fit for Trace. And while Rafa can be okay with it because of who she is, it's not the same for Trace. And, you know, Rafa tries to turn it around and be like, you know, okay, why do you care so much? And Ahsoka says, and probably one of the more meaningful lines in the entire thing, of just like, in my life, I've been thought to always, you know, help people in need. That is the goal. And at least I like that line in the sense of, like, that means, like, from the Jedi Order, she learned to always help people. In that, like, that is one of their goals, ultimately. And while she is encountering these problems in the world of, like, the Jedi were not able to help here or here, this is where you get into the realistic thing of, like, there are only so many Jedi. And when there is a war going on that the Jedi need to fight in, of course there's going to be less Jedi to resolve more sort of smaller problems. And it's just sort of understanding the reality of things with the unfortunate kind of negatives that come with that. In that, you know, would what happened to Trace and Rafa's parents have been averted if the war wasn't on? Like, probably not, just because of, like, you know, the whole Hutt thing was more of a just criminal boss who hired a bounty hunter to have him escape, and then it was a pursuit for the city. That was something that was going to happen anyway, regardless of the war and the Jedi's involvement in it, and so on. And like, especially because I think in the first episode they mentioned specifically, you know, the Jedi and their war. Yet the actual incident, which is the reason for why they don't like the Jedi, had really nothing to do with the war as such. Maybe it's kind of highlighted that maybe they would have cared a bit more if the war wasn't on. But again, it's they don't give enough context to the situation to properly, like, understand that. And yeah, it just ends up being one of those unfortunate episodes that, because it just sort of ended in the exact same place it started, it just feels kind of unimportant. It feels like this arc was kind of almost needlessly extended out to be an episode longer than it should be. And I felt the same way about the Bad Batch arc, which probably only needed to be 3 episodes, and I really think you could have put that down into 2 episodes if you really, really went for it, which would have left us with probably 2-3 extra episodes. I mean, we probably could have fit a whole other arc in here if they were a bit more selective, if they were a bit tighter with the writing. And I think that's just going to be the debate that happens with this season. I think everyone is confident that the finale will deliver, but are we really going to be like, this season was great because, like, 5 of the 12 episodes were great and the rest weren't that amazing? That's the big debate, I suppose, that's always going to be raging with this, unless they announce that they're doing more. I think it's probably will be popular enough to where the idea won't seem crazy that we would want to go back and do more Clone Wars. I get there probably is another animated project coming at some point that will, you know, cover Ahsoka going forward with the whole Ezra and, like, Thrawn plot point. But I think covering the other Clone Wars stuff will be important with regards to the fact that we probably won't have like Ventress like mentioned at all. Maul probably will just end up turning up and not having an explanation for how he is there. Those are the arcs that I think need to be told, more so than the Bad Batch arc or most of what's happening with this arc. And then similarly, I think there will definitely be some value in telling more of the Ahsoka arcs that they were sort of meant to be in between, just to know what was actually going on with her. But solid episode, but nothing too incredibly thought-provoking. So they're my thoughts on the episode. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.